Part 2, Chapter 15, The Nature of Regeneration and its Influence upon the Bodily State. I use the word regeneration not because it is a scriptural one, for the term never occurs but once in the Gospels, and then it is not used in the sense given to it in theology, but because it is a term in common use in religious literature to express the idea of a certain spiritual metamorphosis or mental transformation from a lower to a higher condition of life. There is a vast amount of mystery thrown around the subject of regeneration which does not rightly belong to it. If it be a radical change in the mental or spiritual status of an individual, it may be clearly defined to the consciousness and intelligibly described, so that he who seeks it may know for what he is searching and striving to attain. To seek for a regenerative state of our powers is not or ought not to be like a process of algebra where we aim to find the value of an unknown quantity. As our natural or first birth is an introduction into the natural life, and into a mere sensuous range of thinking and feeling, so to be born from above marks the incipiency of the spiritual life. All progress beyond this is a spiritual growth and not a new birth. Regeneration is the commencement of that higher mode of thinking and feeling which we call spiritual. To think spiritually is to think independently of the testimony and fallacious appearances of the senses. It is to rise out of the trammels of a mere sense-bound existence and to discern truth in its reality. To feel spiritually is to be elevated above the region of a mere sensuous selfishness into which we are all born, and to act from the love of others, the love of the neighbor. It is a question of much importance whether the state of our powers, which we call regeneration, or to use the expression that has the sanction of the Christ, being born from above, is not an orderly development, a natural evolution, phyom the condition in which we first enter upon life. Under the proper conditions, all souls come to be regenerated. A seed may remain long without germinating, but when subjected to the proper influences of heat and moisture it springs into life at once. Is regeneration effected by a miraculous interposition, or does it not enter into the divine plan of creation? Is it not as natural as the unfoldment of the bud into the flower, or the development of childhood into mature manhood? When I affirm that it is a natural and orderly evolution, I do not exclude a divine power and causation from it, for God is immanent in nature and the laws of the human mind. I mean only that he has established and maintained the order expressed by Paul, that which is spiritual is not first in the development of man, but that which is natural, or on a material plane of thought. Afterwards comes that which is spiritual. It seems to me that to regenerate or spiritualize the nature of man, or to raise the soul from a sensuous way of thinking and a selfish mode of feeling and acting, enters not only into the plan of creation, but is the constant aim of God's providential dealings with us. Every human being has within him the germ of a truly spiritual life, although it may now be overlaid with a deep covering of externality. These spiritual powers may exist only potentially, like the oak and the acorn, or they may be dormant or latent, yet they are capable of being so unfolded as to be the predominant power in our life here and hereafter. Progression upward from a state of sensual selfishness and the bondage of the intellect to the lower and sensuous range of its action is in its nature an evolution. It is not progression onward in an uninterrupted straight line, but an ascent to a higher stage of life, another plane of conscious existence. Hence, it is called a new birth, a being born from above. It is being born of the Spirit, that is, our spiritual powers are emancipated from their latent state, analogous to what takes place in our natural powers at our first birth. But that with which we are more particularly concerned is the question: how does this affect the bodily condition, the physical status of the individual? The soul being the organizing principle of the body, and that which imparts to the external organism its only vital force. For the body without the spirit is dead. It always impresses its own inner changes by its inherent, plastic power upon the body, which is its outward expression. The body has no life of itself, but is only an effect, the cause of which is found in the mind. Then the new order or state of mental life, which is called regeneration, ought to record itself in some corresponding change of the outward organism. It must be translated into a bodily expression, as all spiritual states seek an external manifestation. According to the laws of divine order, a genuine spiritual life is outwardly expressed by what is called in the New Testament, and in the language of the Christ, wholeness or health. After 25 years' practice as a physician, I am satisfied that much of what goes under the name of chronic disease, especially of a nervous type, has its root in selfishness. At least, a purely unselfish man or woman, with a consequent tranquil happiness, I never saw who was a nervous invalid. Such a state is usually the result of an overestimate of their own importance and value in the universe, and a desire to make everyone contribute to them, instead of sacrificing themselves to others, according to the Christ principle. The best prescription for such persons is in the words of Jesus, "Give, and it shall be given." To love something outside, or beside, ourselves, and to be actuated by an irrepressible desire to be of use, to do good to others, gives a strength and tenacity of life that in some cases seems to border on the miraculous. I have known some persons whose so ruling passion was to do good who have carried with them through many years an amount of suffering that would have crushed out prematurely many a less unselfish life. In their case, their diseased condition did not subtract a single unit from the days of the years of their life. He who consecrates himself to the good of universal being, and thus becomes an organ of communication between the divine love and human needs, is immortal until his work is done. If God's life is love, and all life is from him, then he who loves the most really exhibits the highest degree of life, and God's eternity contributes to his longevity. It is to be remarked that regeneration, or the being born, or born from above, is not a constitutional change. That is, it creates no new powers or faculties in the human soul. All that it can do is to take the man as he is and regulate and direct the powers that he receives and possesses as an hereditary inheritance. No new creation is possible or is needed, as there is no faculty of the soul that is wrong per se, or in itself, but only in its activity in a wrong direction. The legitimate use of all our powers, and of every native instinct, sentiment, and faculty, is in accordance with the will of God, and is to us the law of health and of God. Every man has in himself the germ of a true spiritual life. Without this he would not be a man, but only an animal. Leibniz introduced into German philosophy, where it has ever remained, the doctrine of unconscious intelligence or latent thought. This hint was taken up by Sir William Hamilton, as before remarked, and has been unfolded by other writers into the now accepted doctrine of preconscious mental action. This has been pushed by the philosophical systems of Schopenhauer and von Hartmann to an extent that borders on atheism. We may carry the idea of Leibniz a step further than he did, and assert that there are in human nature latent and dormant spiritual feelings that, by the vivifying touch of a spiritual influence and instruction, may be awakened into conscious activity. This is what regeneration does for us. It erects a new superstructure on the old foundation, or rather it emancipates the spiritual manhood from its chrysalis state. Many of the higher and diviner powers of our nature exist potentially, and must be evolved from their occult and inactive state. In the philosophy of Swedenborg, he introduces an important distinction between reformation and regeneration, based on his doctrine that the intellect is the form of the love. Reformation is of the understanding. Regeneration is a state of the will, under which term he includes the whole attentional and emotional nature. As long as anyone sees and acknowledges in his mind that evil is evil and good is good, and thinks that good is to be chosen, so long that state is called reformation, or rather reformation. It is only an intellectual theory, an outside form, all external shell of an inward life, and one not adopted by the affections, that is, incorporated into the life. But when he wills to shun evil and do good, which implies a desire and volitional striving, the state of regeneration begins. It is to be feared that much that passes current in the religious world for the new birth goes no further than an intellectual reformation. It is a theory of duty, a mere intellectual system of ethics, rather than a being born from above, or a being born upward to a higher plane of spiritual life. On the relation of the soul and body, Swedenborg is clear and explicit, and greatly in advance of the age in which he lived. According to him, the body is not the real man, but is perpetually derived from the soul. All the things in it are appendages of the soul, and receive from it life and motion, for the body does not act of itself, but from the spirit. It is the form or external boundary of the spirit, and that by moans of which the soul enters into time and space. The word form is derived from the Greek okapa, and means that which is seen. When we say that the body is the form of the soul, we express the idea that the physical organism is the soul made visible. The matter of which the body is composed is in itself dead and inert. Yet the connection between the soul and its outward form or manifestation is such that a mental state translates itself into a bodily expression, and sometimes with instantaneous celerity, as, for instance, in a sudden fright, or the blush that attends a feeling of shame. Hence, regeneration, or a change from a mere natural to a spiritual mode of thinking and feeling, must effect a modification of the bodily condition. The new spirit, as Swedenborg teaches, makes for itself a new body, or external form. It not only translates itself into new modes of external activity, but renews the body itself as the passive instrument of the changed interior state. The reformed inebriate, the sensualist, or the glutton soon holds like another person. As my friend Reverend E. Sears, in his valuable work on regeneration, has said, it is spirit that appropriates matter and makes it flexile to its uses. The immortal soul principle gives to the body all its life and power. It is the vital, formative, organizing, and governing principle in the organic material. Hence, the fact so often brought to our notice in the gospel narratives that the conversion of the soul and the cure of disease went together in the practice of the Christ, so that the new spiritual state might have a solid basis of physical health on which to permanently rest. The changed soul makes for itself a new bodily condition or outward expression in harmony with its altered spiritual status. This is no more a miracle than it is when the emotion of fear or the feeling of melancholy or the sense of guilt and shame record themselves in the face. In fact, the science of physiognomy of Lavater and of Dr. Gall's phrenology are based on this relation of the soul to its body. The renewal of the body by regeneration is effected in accordance with the same law, and by some force far different from that which is the producing cause in all mere chemical changes and phenomena. It is the result of a spiritual chemistry, a mental dynamic force, certain in its action, but poorly understood. To effect a renewal of the body by regeneration, or an elevation of the soul from a material to a spiritual range of thought and feeling, requires no more time, and not so much, than intervenes between our conception in the womb and our birth. In fact, during a period of 9 months, the corporeal organism could be made over anew more than once. But the disciple of Gall will confront me with the question, will the organs in the brain of the mental faculties be altered in size? Meeting him on his own ground, I answer, as none of them are wrong in themselves, they do not so much need to be annihilated or changed in size as to be changed in their mode of action. I should not expect that a pugilist or champion prizefighter, if regenerated, would exhibit a diminution in the size of his hands and arms or in the strength of his muscular system, but only that he would put them to a better use. If the soul is born, or impelled, from above, it will elevate the body to a higher plane of life and a diviner form of activity. We must be here to work, and men who work can only work for men, and, not to work in vain, must comprehend humanity and go work humanly and raise men's bodies still by raising souls, as God did first. Mrs. Browning.